All right, welcome back to the Language of Behavior podcast. My name is Joshua Stamper, and I have the privilege of having the wonderful Charlie Peck on with me as we're doing episode 3. We've got a new question from a listener, and just to kind of give a setup for the conversation, we're going to be talking about setting up a secure space based on the question, and Charlie's going to share that question out here soon. But before that, I just want to talk about just the opportunity for folks to jump on, share the podcast with new folks as we are brand new podcast. And I would love for folks to be able to follow, subscribe, and then also share it out with colleagues or friends in the future. We're trying to build this up with our listeners. And Charlie, do you want to share what was posted in our Google form for this specific episode?
Yeah, so the question is, how do we set up a classroom to reduce behaviors? And I love this question. This is a great way to start. So I'm gonna ask you guys this, or actually I'm gonna state this. Your space may feel good for you, but not for others. So just think about your own space. That's the question I have for you. How do you think it feels to others? What do you think they think when they enter your classroom, your office, and even your building? Josh, what's your experience with this when people come into your building? What do you think people are thinking like when you were the principal there?
Oh my gosh, that was something that we assessed often. And we actually did this, Charlie, as a, kind of like role playing situation. We would actually come in, okay, I am in the mindset of a parent and I'd walk into my school. What does it feel like? What are the first things that I see? Do I have a smiling face behind the secretary's desk as I'm entering and being greeted? How's the seating arrangement? Are parents right on top of each other? Is the paint color appropriate? And then also just walk into our offices too. And for myself, when I first became an administrator, the person prior to me had painted the walls bright red based on a college that they went to. And that was just not conducive for myself. I felt anxious. I felt easily irritated with that color in my office. And I felt like my parents and my students did so also. So right away, I painted that to change that. And then also as an administrator, walking into classrooms, also having that as, okay, if I was a student, how does the classroom feel? And oftentimes there were just chaotic feelings. And I know, Charlie, you have a story specifically about this, but I know as an administrator walking in, sometimes I had to have a conversation of, have you ever thought about doing X, Y, and Z in the classroom to potentially alleviate some of these negative emotions that our kids probably are feeling when they're entering this space?
Mm-hmm. And maybe it's not one thing alone, but this particular story I have about a kid who was in a class acting out a lot. In fact, the teacher had moved the kid's desk away from all the other kids, and that's where that kid always sat. And this is a first grader, okay? And when the parent went into the parent-teacher meeting, they walked in, they're like, "Oh my gosh, this is so chaotic. It feels so overwhelming." So sensory is definitely a part of it, or can be for a lot of people, but this kid was feeling so overwhelmed. There were a lot of different kinds of lights. There were things cluttered all over the classroom, all over the walls. It was a tight space anyway. And so that kid, when they moved to another classroom, they moved him to a whole nother classroom, he thrived. He did really well, but he actually had behaviors that emulated autistic behaviors so much to where he was rocking and he was crying, he was breaking down. And though there could be other issues going on, for this particular kid, it was such a trigger for him to be just in that space that when he did move in a different classroom, he was just doing so much better. So just consider, like, does it feel cluttered to you? If it doesn't, does it feel cluttered to other people? We just have to shift perspectives. What else do you think, Josh?
No, I just want to highlight in that story just the idea that the student was thriving in other classrooms. And we used to uncover this as far as, if a teacher brought up a behavior issue with a child, well, asking the other teachers also, hey, are you seeing the same behaviors in your classes? And when the answer was no, we're not seeing that, that's when we started to try to uncover, well, maybe there is a sensory issue, or maybe there's a trigger that's occurring in that classroom, and trying to figure out and deduct what's going on with that specific kid, but then also bring the parents in, because sometimes, parents can go into a classroom and they feel, hey, this is not conducive for my child. This is what we need. Or, hey, they in the past, let's say in elementary school, they used to have fidgets that they were offered, and they used to have stress balls, and they used to have, other things in the classroom, or maybe a safe space where they could crawl under something to feel safety. And that's not being provided at the middle school level. Is there a way to potentially have this, given to them in this classroom specifically? And parents are a great resource for that, because obviously they know their child best. And so, to be able to tap into other teachers and the parents, of course, making an individualized plan for them and building the space they need to be successful.
Yeah, and considering that space again, we want it to feel secure, so we need to make sure that kids, especially some kids who have trauma going on, or they didn't want to be in the classroom in the first place,
Yeah.
or they're struggling with something, you really want to give them an outlet. You got to let them know how they can get out of the classroom. You may not say it overtly to them, but you can make sure that the space is clear, that you go over here to sign out, and then that's where the bathroom is, and you can easily get there, and then you can easily get back to your space. Or some kids need extra space with the teacher, and so getting a clear space to the teacher's desk is
Mhm.
is good too. I'm really, these are some barriers that actually keep kids wondering, like, how am I going to get to the bathroom if I need to? Especially some kids have like colitis or IBS, and I
Yep.
know some of that will be put into an IEP, but it's not always known. There's so much more I could say about that. But some kids really stress over that more than you think. How am I going to get to the bathroom? How am I going to get out of this classroom? Or how am I going to get up to the teacher's desk if I have a question? Which would actually keep them from going to seek help if they needed it. Those kind of
Mhm.
things are just, we just want you to think of those things. It makes a kid feel secure in the space with you if you consider it.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I think they have other things too. We would look at the lighting also. Obviously, the fluorescent lights, I felt like actually escalated kids more so. I know when I was administrator, I would take kids outside all the time because I wanted to give them fresh air. I wanted to give them natural light. I wanted to change up their environment. And I know it's not always possible for our teachers, but you can still change the lighting. You can look at, some different scents that you put in as far as smell, that are more pleasing to kids, instead of potentially the kid that came from gym class sitting next to them.
Mm.
And then also, just like we talked about, the warm colors, and some of the things that you're putting on your wall also. Do you have water and snacks for them? I know a lot of our kids dealt with issues at home, not having food, and so that was a barrier that we wanted to make sure that we provide for our kids. And we would supply that as much as we could to our teachers, so it wasn't coming out of their budget, because that's the last thing that we want. Um, and then obviously the different chairs and the furniture in the classroom, allowing kids the opportunity to, have a desk on the floor, or a standing desk, or, finding couches and things that we could bring in that were going to be more comfortable and conducive to them, to be in that space for such a long time.
Yeah. And one of the things when you said lighting that made me think, one of the things my students loved that I did most of the time that I could pick up on it is when the lights were off and I was going to turn the lights back on, I'd say, watch your eyes. And
Mm.
that would indicate that I'm turning the light back on. And so there's a transition there. If you just kind of turn it on, it's jarring to them. But the fact that I said it, some of the kids would tell me, I appreciate that you were thinking of me in that moment. And it was so minor. I mean, I'm not building myself up to be some superstar because I did that. But
You are a
little,
superstar, Charlie. Don't.
well, I don't know about that. We'll see. I don't know that every year I would get that review, but I will say those little things do matter. And
Mhm.
also, okay, this drives me nuts. I still see it, but I think people just don't know. Even with your teenage students, get down to their level,
Yes.
right? Like, don't hover. We don't want to hover over students ever. They hate that, especially teenagers. They hate it. So when you notice your space, and you actually like pivot back a little bit if you feel like you're too close, they notice that stuff. I talk with them about this a lot. They notice that and they appreciate that you care about their space. Minor, but it actually is kind of big.
No, I think it did just with adults too. As far
Yeah.
as, looking at environments in your office, is there a power struggle even going on with the furniture that's in your office, between you and the child, or you and the adult? And that was something I was very mindful of. I think it was posed to me by a parent, actually, where I could see a significant difference between how I was interacting with them in the front office versus in my own office. And they were thankfully transparent enough to say, hey, this is an intimidating situation. I don't like being in the principal's office. I don't like being between a desk. And that was really when it dawned on me, like, oh, there's stuff being communicated that I wasn't intending just based on the furniture setup in my office. And so we quickly transitioned to a conference room where I could sit next to them. And again, I dramatically felt a difference in the communication, in the body language. You could see them just kind of deflate that emotion, that negative emotion. It kind of just fell off their back as we went into that new space. So, even for our administrators, our leaders, if you're in office, what is your furniture even telling those who are entering? Do you have more of a collaborative space, or is this something where you have the great divide between the authority versus the person coming in?
Yeah, I know. It is important to get those different perspectives too, isn't it? Yeah,
Yep.
and predictability is important too. I mean, a lot of
Hmm.
us have rules and you point to the rules, but if you don't have that in your classroom, it's kind of hard, but it's easy to like say, "Hey, remember this is what we do," and you can just point to it, or other kids will point it out. Things like that. We understand predictability is important, especially kids who have a lot of trauma. If they're going to feel secure, remember we're talking about how to set up a secure space so that
Yep.
they'll be more engaged when they feel secure. Or little things like this that I loved is I noticed that there were times that I was trying to teach through something and they weren't there. And so I wanted to meet them where they are. I wanted to give them some time to relax if they had just a lot going on and they were working hard. I could tell they needed something. So I always had a copy. I had this printout of generic if we watched or listened to a podcast. So I give
Mhm.
them choice. Listen, do you all want to go down to like podcast mode here? And I'd have a list of them that were 15, 20 minutes. And I'd say, okay, go get a sheet. It was always a handout, hard copy. And they just go grab it. They could choose one of the podcasts and just kind of connect with it and write down some key points. But things like that, just knowing when to shift out of the energy and creating that space up that says, hey, listen, I'm here with you. I know it's not always perfect. So we're going to shift that space together, that energy when we need it so it can be secure for you.
Yeah, I want to go back to the predictability piece. As an administrator going into classrooms, I think the teachers that I saw most successful were those ones that had those daily routines that the kids knew exactly what's going to happen, right? They knew their teacher was going to be standing at the door greeting them, giving a side hug, high five, whatnot. Um, they would go into their classroom. They knew exactly what they needed to grab as far as the supplies. And then when class started, they would stand up. I know one teacher I'm specifically thinking of, she had the lights dim, she had like soothing music on, and then they would, do a little song and recite the objective for the day. And then they would kind of get into the class. And that happened every single time. And I was in our classroom often, mostly because it was even for myself. Like I just loved being in that space because the kids, you could just feel the joy of them entering into that environment. And some of them, it wasn't their favorite class as far as the subject matter, but it was their favorite teacher environment to go in because they felt like it was a safe space and they had a good relationship with that teacher who was also very bubbly and was excited to see them. And she was phenomenal. But, you're talking about that trauma piece. A lot of those kids, and a lot of our kids in general, they don't have power and they don't have control of what's going on in their personal life at home. But then also, if you think about school, how much time do they own at school? Most of the time, it's someone as an adult, a teacher or administrator, telling them what to do, right? Even if you think about like some of the times that they are supposedly having free time, let's say the cafeteria, it's like, sit down in your spot until your row is called to go get lunch. And then they go into the lunch line, and then the lunch ladies are telling them what to do and what they can grab, whatnot. Like everything is dictated for them. And if you think about the opportunities for them to actually make choices for themselves throughout the school day, there's not very much. So if we can give that not only predictability, but like you said, that option of choice, I think that's so powerful.
Yeah, it is. There's just so many things to consider, but really what we're asking you to do is just instead of jumping to conclusions about a child's behavior,
Yep.
we just want you to consider what your space might be doing to them or imposing on them or triggering in them. And that might be contributing to behavior. So if you just consider it, that would be really helpful.
Yep. Yeah. Sure. Like I said, do the role play. Enter in your
Yeah.
classroom. How are you
Yeah.
feeling as a kid? If you were asked to learn in that space for 45 minutes, maybe it's a block of 90 minutes, or maybe elementary school, it's the entire day. How is that child feeling in that moment? How are you feeling if you're pretending to be that kid? And if you need an outside perspective, maybe it's asking a colleague to come in, maybe it's an administrator, maybe it's a parent, the parent of that child to say, would you mind coming in and, giving some feedback? I think that's very powerful. And I think it's going to maybe open your eyes to some things that you didn't realize prior to.
Yeah. And as we wrap this up, I bet people are like, well, what about just asking the kids? Like, I was just thinking to
That
myself, I'm
too.
like, I probably should have just said that.
Yeah.
But, maybe we should ask the kids. What do you think?
They will tell
What do
you.
feel like? Yeah, I probably should have said that. So you can always ask them, and then they will so appreciate that you asked them. It makes them feel valued. It makes them feel seen and heard, and all of that. It's so important. So I think that would be my last thought: is ask the kids how they're feeling, and if there's anything in your control that you can make more comfortable for them, then try to do that.
I love it. All right, y'all. I will put up the form one more time for those. I've tried to say this every episode, but we want to know what's going on in your world, how we can assist, what are some questions that we can tackle in this podcast. So the form is on the screen for those who are watching on YouTube. Otherwise, it will be in the show notes for everyone. So you can click it. It literally is one question asking for your feedback in regards to how we can assist. And then, if you want more information in regards to Charlie and her wisdom and insights, you can go to thrivingeducator.org, or my website is joshtamper.com. Obviously, if we can help you in any way, please reach out and definitely check out those two websites. Charlie, what else can we provide to them?
Well, we have tons of resources on those websites. So if they go there, there's a lot more information, a lot of free stuff too.
Yep. So stick with us as further episodes. We're going to continue to provide you with what's going on in our world as far as what we're providing. Obviously, we've got the book coming up, but we like to do free webinars. And then, of course, you can check out more on the YouTube page at Joshua Stamper. We've got up from our summit that we just did, Charlie, with so many wonderful guests. We just posted those to that YouTube channel, so you can head over there and get some more free resources. But with that, Charlie, thank you so much for joining once again this week, and super excited for episode 4.
Me too. Thanks, guys.